You know, for better or worse, American culture is leaving. As much as we think we still want to own things, we don't, because we don't want to
Mm.
have that expense and those uncalculated surprises. Once again, this video is just on us talking on maintenance, us talking on the why people rent in the first place, and why you should buy a rental, because you probably are renting right now. You have rented in the past, and you've at least experienced an Airbnb yourself. And so we can all agree that we are moving to a rental type market, rental type era over the next 50 years. Brad and I were on this call right now. We're going over the latest lead magnet that we're trying to get for marketing. So lead magnets in any industry is something that you put out to your customer in hopes that they find high value in it, and so they trade their information for the data or information you provide them. So that can be like quizzes, it can be just like straight up downloadable content like we're making, or it can be like a video where there's some kind of exchange of value for information. And since we are in the data age, me having an email of a landlord like yourself watching this is more valuable to me than anything, because if you can continually get more value from me from this downloadable, you know, top 4 things you can put on your lease, then eventually that trust will have to be there because of how much value we've given away for free. And then eventually maybe I'll be able to get you as a paying customer, as we all wish and hope, and do this on the side in order to build the trust, convert you to a customer, and then ultimately operate your properties for you. So that way it's a passive income experience like all the internet gurus want you to have and want to sell you, but we actually do, because it's a service-based industry, property management, that if you find the right property manager that knows these tips and tricks, it can ultimately bring you to where you'd want to only put your money in real estate compared to stocks, bonds, or any other type of asset or appreciating investment. Because at the end of the day, if someone could promise you, which sadly I cannot yet, but we're always building a service to get to that point, a passive experience for owning real estate, most people would, especially if they have somebody guarding their money, increasing rent, which is ultimately a direct cash flow increase on your wallet. Most people want the appreciation, the equity, which is kind of the same thing, the tax benefits, which we will get into even further in other videos. Keyword is cost seg study. So in the tax realm, if you get a cost seg done on your property, we're going to go into this deeper in another video. It's where you can basically accumulate all the write-offs up front of the expense of owning a property. That way you can lower your tax bill, because you are probably a high earner that has a lot of cash on hand, and we're trying to diminish what that looks like to the government legally. So that way, this is just one more thing in real estate that provides so much value, and why you should own it over other things that you can invest in. So for maintenance, the advice I would give is to have you'll have to kind of chat GPT it a little bit, but there needs to be a clause in there for maintenance concerns that basically like the landlord and or property manager can access the property for regular maintenance, like giving the tenant a reasonable warning or notice. It's like a 24-hour advance point, and that will allow you as the landlord to go into the unit without having to do anything but giving a 24-hour notice. And that way, oddly enough, like there are tenants that are like, don't come into my unit, you're not allowed in my unit. And if you have that in your lease, you can then access it if you do truly perceive that there is a maintenance concern at the property and you need to get in. You or your vendor that you approve can then get access in 24 hours. So that's like a good piece of advice, to be honest.
Got it. Okay.
You can give it like, this gives you ability to access the unit when you have like problem tenants that are abnormal, that have abnormal behavior.
Oh, I like that. Okay. That's actually a good clause. Yeah.
And then the early lease termination, like, we charge up to 3 months advance rent due. So like if they leave in 30 days, they have to pay like 3 months of rent before they move out. And that gives us kind of leverage for people to make serious decisions and not just have people treat a lease like they're like a hotel room where they just rent it by day. It's, hey, we're making a commitment, because the whole point of a long-term lease is to have stabilized income as a landlord. If you were trying to make, nightly nightly rent, you would probably charge more and you would shift to an Airbnb model. And so
Mhm.
like the whole concept is you're paying for flexibility, and Airbnb is the ultimate flexibility because you can get it for 1 night, 2 night, 3 night, where long-term rent is cheaper across the world because it's not as flexible. And that should be understood for both parties. I am actually trying to buy a property and the seller is having trouble selling, so we're trying to make a deal because he signed a lease that was so long that the property is not really worth very much because the rent is so low, and that lease is protecting the tenant from having to pay more. So it's on both sides. Like, you have a tenant that signed a 24-month lease, $400 below market rate. So if I buy this property, I don't get to change that cash flow for the next 18 months now because it's been 6 months that lease has been going on. And so it negatively is affecting the seller because he can't find anyone to buy the property right now because there's no flexibility on creating more cash flow out of it. And what's even funnier is that the bank is not allowing people to borrow a lot of money because they also see the same issue where it's not creating enough rent for the price the seller wants. So the seller has had to come down like $80,000 from their original asking price to get anywhere close to somebody saying yes, because there's the lease that's non-negotiably on that property for the next 18 months. Like, long-term leasing, there's not a lot of flexibility for either party. The landlord is saying yes to it because it's, consistent, predictable income, and the tenant is saying yes to it because it's predictable and less expensive living. And that even goes for one of your previous tips, which was, the tenant pays for the first $100 of maintenance. It is something that I see a lot of self-managing landlords do, and I see a lot of hacks around that on the internet, although I think it's ridiculous because you as a tenant are trying to have predictable expenses. That's the whole point of renting. If the house I live in, I own this, so I have to pay for all of the maintenance, and it's very unpredictable. If my HVAC goes out, I'm paying for that. So if my light bulb goes out, I got to pay for that. And so, but I'm willing to do that because I get ownership eventually once the loan is paid off. As a landlord, I think it's ethical, and I think it's right by the industry to always cover everything but damage done by the tenant that would not have been done at a normal wear and tear usage. If the tenant is wanting to stay, their dollar is saying they don't want to own it because they'd rather have a predictable cost. It's kind of like insurance. You own a car, but you pay insurance on it, or you have health insurance, like any type of insurance. You pay a little money every month, but if something really big happens, it'll get handled. You might pay a little bit more for a rent compared to if you own it, but if something breaks when you own it, that's really high cost. So you'd rather have this predictable expense where if anything breaks, I just call the landlord and they handle it.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate value of renting, and that's really why our country is moving to a rental market compared to a owning market. Like, really only rich people are going to be owning houses in the next 40 years. And what's even funnier to teach you about how even rich people think is that even rich people are starting to rent more because they go, well, why would I pay $1 million to have this beach house that I go to like 4 times a year? Because I got this business I got to run otherwise. I'm in Knoxville, Tennessee. Why would I go buy and have all the overhead and all the liability of that beach house when I can just go rent it for 4 weeks out of the year? I'll never own it, but it'll actually be like less expensive and like lower risk if I just rent it for 90 days out of the year. And so it's like really like we're all shifting to like we want to own less and we'd rather experience more. If I don't buy the $1 million beach house, I also have a budget to go out to this big mountain ski resort the next year. The following year I can go try out the desert, and then I have flexibility and it's the same cost, but I get more experiences for it. And so, for better or worse, American culture is leaving. As much as we think we still want to own things, we don't, because we don't want to have that expense and those calculated surprises. And this goes right back into, what we're looking at here, which is $100 surprise attack on a tenant. So once again, this video is just on us talking on maintenance, us talking on why people rent in the first place, and why you should buy a rental, because you probably are renting right now. You have rented in the past, and you've at least experienced an Airbnb yourself. And so we can all agree that we are moving to a rental type market, rental type era over the next 50 years. And even our government, like it or not, is saying, they want us to not own anything and like what we have. And that's sadly the truth. And, if you play along the game and play the offensive side and own the assets to those people that want to rent, you will be on the same side and you will come out a winner. This is what I believe. This is why I'm in property management. And this is also why I invest in real estate myself and hold long-term rentals.